For nearly a century, historians and pilots alike have debated a single question: which piston-powered fighter truly ruled the skies of World War II? Some say the Germans built it, others swear it was British ingenuity or American muscle that took the crown. But today, we're cutting through the legends and nostalgia, relying only on verified test reports, combat records, and official performance data to uncover the truth. These are not paper projects or prototypes that never flew every machine. On this list was real, built, and flown in the fiercest battles of the war. Each one pushed the boundaries of engineering, born from desperation and refined by the brutal necessity of survival in the air. They weren't just planes, they were mechanical gladiators, crafted to climb higher, dive faster, and outfly death itself. This is the definitive countdown of the fastest, propeller-driven fighters ever to take flight in World War II. From the daring underdogs to the absolute monarch of speed that left every rival in its wake. At number 8 is Germany's Focke-Wulf FW190D9, a machine that marked the final, desperate evolution of one of the Luftwaffe's most feared fighters. Known to pilots as the Dora or Long Nose, the D9 was a radical transformation of the earlier radial engine FW190s that had dominated low-altitude combat since 1941. Its creation came from necessity. By 1944, Allied bombers were flying higher and faster, and Germany's once superior fighters were struggling to intercept them. The solution came in the form of the Junkers Jumo 213A, a liquid-cooled inline engine producing over 1,700 horsepower. But it wasn't a simple engine swap. The new power plant required a longer nose and a rebalanced fuselage. Giving the Dora its unmistakable stretched profile, the change completely redefined the FW190's character. No longer just a brutal, low-level brawler, the D9 became a sleek, high-altitude interceptor capable of reaching 426 miles per hour. It retained the roll rate and rugged construction that made the original FW190 famous, but now possessed the speed and altitude performance to challenge the latest Allied aircraft, including the Mustang and Spitfire. KXIV. Production began in August 1944, and though resources were scarce, over 700 Doras were completed before the war's end. Luftwaffe pilots immediately recognized its strengths. It climbed better, handled smoothly, and maintained its stability in dives where earlier variants faltered. For pilots defending Germany in 1945, it was a small glimmer of hope in a war rapidly turning hopeless. In the chaotic final months, the Dora fought in scattered squadrons across the collapsing Reich. It intercepted American bombers, tangled with P-51s, and strafed advancing Soviet forces. Despite being outnumbered, the Dora's pilots, many of them veterans, often held their own, proving the design's excellence even under impossible odds. Some historians call the FW190D9 Germany's last great piston-engine fighter, a machine that might have changed the air war had it arrived a year earlier. But by the time it entered service, fuel shortages, pilot losses, and relentless Allied raids left it fighting a losing battle. The Dora symbolized not just innovation, but the tragedy of brilliance arriving too late. At number 7 is Britain's Hawker Tempest MKV, capable of reaching 435 miles per hour, a speed that made it one of the fastest Allied fighters of the war. Developed from the Hawker Typhoon, the Tempest wasn't merely an upgrade. It was a complete reimagining of what a low-altitude interceptor could be. The Typhoon, though powerful, had been plagued with issues: compressibility at high speeds, poor high-altitude performance, and structural weaknesses. Designer Sidney Cam, never satisfied, went back to the drawing board. He refined the wing into a thinner, elliptical shape and paired it with the monstrous Napier Sabre II engine, a 24-cylinder, liquid-cooled powerhouse delivering over 2,200 horsepower. The result was astonishing. When the Tempest entered service in April 1944, it arrived just in time to meet a terrifying new German weapon, the V-1 flying bomb. Nicknamed the Buzz Bomb, it was small, fast, and hard to intercept, but the Tempest was faster. It became the most successful V-1 interceptor of the war, with Tempest squadrons accounting for over 800 kills, British pilots discovered a daring technique, flying alongside the pilotless bombs and using their wingtip to flip them off course. It was an audacious maneuver that required precision and nerves of steel. But the Tempest was equally deadly against piloted aircraft. Its firepower of 420mm Hispano cannons shredded enemy fighters and ground targets alike, while its agility made it a match for anything the Luftwaffe could send against it. In the summer of 1944, Tempest squadrons swept across occupied Europe, tangling with FW-190s and Me-262 jets, hunting trains, trucks, and retreating columns during the Allied advance. Pilots admired its speed and stability at low altitude. It was the perfect machine for Europe's fast-moving ground war. By the war's end, the Tempest had earned a reputation as one of the RAF's finest piston fighters ever built. It combined brute force with refinement, proving that British engineering could produce not just elegance but raw, unrelenting power. Many considered it the perfect blend of speed, handling, and lethality, a fighter that came dangerously close to perfection. At number 6 is the Supermarine Spitfire Mk-14, topping out at 446 miles per hour, a machine that carried the legendary Spitfire name into its ultimate and most powerful form. The early Spitfires of 1940 had saved Britain from invasion. But by 1943, they were outclassed by faster and heavier German aircraft. The solution came in the form of the Rolls-Royce Griffon 65 engine, a beast producing more than 2,000 horsepower, nearly double the output of the early Merlin engines. Installing the Griffon transformed the aircraft entirely. Engineers reinforced the airframe, enlarged the tail, and reshaped the nose to manage the engine's torque. The result was a Spitfire that climbed like a rocket and reached combat altitudes faster than almost anything else in the sky. Entering service in early 1944, the Mk-14 quickly proved itself against high-flying German reconnaissance aircraft and even the new Me-262 jet fighters. Pilots were astonished at its acceleration. German opponents, accustomed to escaping older Spitfire models, suddenly found themselves being hunted down. Over 900 MKX-IVs were built, serving across Europe until the war's final days. To many pilots, it was the Spitfire perfected, a symbol of Britain's determination to refine excellence until the very end. Before we reach the top 5, take a moment to think. Which of these fighters would you have wanted to fly? The rugged German Dora, the relentless Tempest, or the sleek, deadly Spitfire Mk-14. Each represented the height of its nation's ingenuity, but the next entries pushed even further. At number 3 is America's Republic P-47M Thunderbolt, a brute of a machine. Capable of 472 miles per hour and engineered specifically to hunt Germany's new jet fighters in the war's closing months, the P-47 was already legendary, big, heavy, and almost indestructible. But the M variant took that legacy to a new extreme. Equipped with a Pratt & Whitney R2800057 engine, enhanced turbo supercharger, and water injection for bursts of extra power, it became one of the fastest piston-engine fighters in the world. The P-47M was built to tackle a new kind of threat, the Me-262 jet. By late 1944, Allied bombers were under attack from these revolutionary German aircraft, which could outrun almost every Allied fighter. The U.S. Army Air Forces needed something that could climb higher and dive faster to counter them, and Republic delivered. Only 130 P-47 megaseconds were built, and they served exclusively with the 56th Fighter Group, known as Zemk's Wolfpack. These elite pilots were among the most experienced in Europe, and they quickly learned how to use the M speed to their advantage. Once its early engine issues were fixed, the P-47M became a jet killer, ambushing Me-262s during takeoff or landing when the German jets were most vulnerable. In combat, the P-47M retained all the strengths that made the Thunderbolt famous: heavy armament, rugged construction, and incredible survivability. It could absorb punishment that would destroy lesser fighters, yet still make it home. Pilots loved it for its power and its personality, a roaring steel beast that symbolized American determination. and industrial might, the P-47M was the final and most advanced version of the Thunderbolt, representing the absolute peak of what the design could achieve. It was, quite literally, the fastest jug ever built, a machine that proved that with the right engineering and the right pilots, even a 7-ton fighter could dance with the fastest machines in the sky. At number 2 is Germany's Dornier Do-335 Pfeil, meaning the arrow. A fighter unlike anything else that flew in World War II, with a top speed of 474 miles per hour. It was one of the most advanced and unconventional piston-engine aircraft ever built. The Do-335's secret lay in its push-pull configuration, 2 engines mounted along the fuselage, one in the nose and another behind the cockpit, each driving its own propeller. This unique setup eliminated the drag of wing-mounted engines while doubling the available power. It was engineering brilliance born from wartime desperation. At full throttle, the Arrow was astonishingly fast, faster than nearly every Allied piston fighter and capable of climbing like a jet. Armed with heavy 30mm and 20mm cannons, it was intended to dominate the skies as a high-speed interceptor and bomber-destroyer. On paper, it could have rewritten the air war, but like so many of Germany's late-war marvels, the Do-335 arrived too late. Development delays meant the first prototype didn't fly until October 1943, and production aircraft only began reaching units in early 1945. Fewer than 40 were completed before the war ended, and none saw true frontline combat. Yet the pilots who flew it, even Allied test pilots after the war, were stunned. It handled beautifully, felt stable even at high speeds, and offered acceleration unheard of in piston aircraft. The U.S. Army Air Forces, after testing a captured Do-335, called it the most remarkable propeller-driven aircraft of the war. The Arrow was the final triumph of German aeronautical ingenuity, a machine that proved how far design could be pushed under pressure. Had it arrived 2 years earlier, it might have altered the balance in the skies over Europe. Instead, it became a ghost of potential, a glimpse of what might have been if time and fate had aligned differently. And at number 1, the fastest propeller-driven fighter of the entire war, the North American P-51H Mustang. Capable of 487 miles per hour, this aircraft represented the absolute pinnacle of American piston-engine engineering, while the famous P-51D had already earned its place in history, escorting bombers deep into enemy territory. The model was a complete reinvention. Engineers stripped over 1,500 pounds from the design, using lighter materials and a slimmer airframe to reduce drag. Beneath its sleek lines roared the Packard V1650-9, the American-built version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin. Fitted with water injection for emergency power bursts, the transformation was extraordinary. The P-51H wasn't just faster, it was more agile, more responsive, and more forgiving. Test pilots praised its razor-sharp control and effortless climb rate. It could roll faster, turn tighter, and cover vast distances thanks to its legendary range of over 850 miles on internal fuel alone. Production began in February 1945, but once again the clock ran out. Only 555 aircraft were delivered before Japan surrendered. None reached combat, though a few arrived in the Pacific just as the war ended. Still, in every measurable sense, the P-51H was the final word in piston-powered flight, a masterpiece that marked the end of an era. This was the ultimate evolution of the Mustang, the fighter that had carried the Allies to victory. Sleeker, lighter, and deadlier than ever, the P-51H showed what humanity could achieve when survival demanded perfection. These 8 aircraft, from the Dora's desperate innovation to the Mustang's perfect refinement, represent the very edge of what could be done with propellers and pistons. Each was born from a moment when nations gambled everything on speed, when a single mile per hour could mean the difference between victory and annihilation. It's remarkable how close they were, just 61 miles per hour, separating the 8th place F-W190D9 from the first place P-51H each. Machine was a miracle of engineering, shaped by courage, necessity, and sacrifice. In the skies over Europe and the Pacific, these fighters weren't just machines, they were extensions of the men who flew them. Men who climbed into thin aluminum shells, strapped to roaring engines and challenged gravity, steel, and fate. They remind us that progress often comes at the edge of desperation, and that even in humanity's darkest hours, innovation can reach breathtaking heights. The piston engine age ended almost as quickly as it peaked. Within months of these machines taking flight, the jet era arrived, silent, cold, and unstoppable. The same nations that had once fought for every last ounce of horsepower now raced toward a future powered by thrust instead of torque. The Messerschmitt Me 262 and the Gloster Meteor had already proven that jet propulsion was the next step. The roar of propellers was being replaced by the scream of turbines. The technology that once defined air power was becoming obsolete before the paint on these aircraft had even dried. Yet even as jets began to dominate, the legacy of these piston fighters refused to fade. They had written the blueprint, teaching engineers how to manage speed, drag, cooling, and lift at the very edge of physical possibility. Every jet that followed carried their DNA in its wings. For the pilots, too, the transition was bittersweet. Men who had mastered these prop-driven beasts, who could feel every vibration through the stick, every shift in airflow along the fuselage, suddenly found themselves flying smoother, colder, faster machines that no longer needed finesse to stay aloft. The jet didn't forgive mistakes, but it also didn't feel alive the same way. The era of the instinctive dogfighter was ending. But perhaps that's why these aircraft still captivate us today. They represent a human struggle we can still understand. They say the sound of a piston engine at full throttle is something you never forget. It's not just noise, it's a heartbeat. The pulse of a time when flight was still personal, dangerous, and beautifully human. Every aircraft on this list tells part of that story. They were born from necessity, refined by desperation, and perfected by courage. Nations fought with every ounce of ingenuity they had, not just to win battles, but to master the laws of the sky. The men who flew these machines didn't know if they'd see tomorrow. They didn't have the luxury of safety or the distance of automation. What they had was instinct, the feel of the stick in their hands, the vibration through the pedals, and the roar of the engine that seemed almost alive beneath them. Each flight was a conversation between man and machine, a delicate balance of trust, skill, and courage. Push too far and it would kill you. But in the right hands, these aircraft became an extension of the pilot's will. They could climb higher, turn tighter, and strike faster than anyone thought possible. That's why even now, 80 years later, we still look back at them with awe. Because they remind us of what humans can do when everything is on the line. So when you watch a P-51H streak across the sky today, or hear the deep growl of a Bearcat engine echo across an airfield, it's more than nostalgia. It's a reminder of how far we've come and how much we once risked to get there. Because history isn't written in ink. It's written in oil, sweat, and the sound of engines fading into the horizon. And that's why we tell these stories. Not just to remember the machines, but to honor the people who believed they could build something that would defy time itself. They did, and for a few brief years, they ruled the skies. If you've made it this far, you already know why this matters. The names may fade, the metal may rust, but their legacy never will. Here, on WWII Rewind, we bring those legacies back to life. One story at a time. So, if you love these stories of speed, courage, and innovation, make sure you subscribe, because this is only the beginning. In the next episode, we'll go beyond the propellers, into the dawn of the jet age, where the race for the skies took on a new form, and the future of flight began. Until then, remember this. The sound of history isn't silence. It's the echo of wings cutting through the air. A reminder that the sky has always belonged to those brave enough to chase it.